Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Tobias Demker. Welcome to another edition of our podcast where we pick a topic and we see where the conversation takes us. Our conversations tend to focus around personal development, leadership, organizational change, and various philosophical topics. So, how are you feeling today, Tobias?
Yeah, I'm good. I haven't seen you for 2 weeks or so. So, spring is coming, things
Yeah,
are easing up. So, yeah, it's a good day.
you're looking very relaxed after your ski vacation.
Yeah, so we had the sports vacation. That was a good sort of time off. I was doing a little bit of work at the same time, but
Uh,
that's contemporary life for us, right?
Yeah, when you're freelance. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I guess you're coming back motivated, and that's my word of the day. So
Yeah.
we're going to have a little conversation about motivation, and I know that's a deep topic, as it always is, as most of the topics we try to cover. So what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about motivation?
Actually, if I just think what comes to mind for me today, yesterday I went for a really long run. Um, and as I was running, I was thinking like, what keeps me going? Why am I doing this? What keeps me going? And then thinking about long distance runners and ultra marathon runners. I mean, when they've been running for such a long time, what motivates them to keep doing this? It's because when you reach a point, it's not fun anymore. You're not enjoying the run. You got the wind in your face. But still, you keep going, and the sense of um, this urge for achievement, I guess it's something that is extremely motivating for a lot of people, and taking on that challenge, overcoming something. So for me today, well, if you mentioned motivation, that's what I'm starting to think about. What why do we take on these challenges that don't seem so fun, but still do our utmost effort to accomplish them?
Yeah, I think that's the most difficult thing about running a marathon. From like, I'm not a marathon runner. I don't enjoy running enough to go that distance.
Mm,
But most people tell me that the challenge is the mental part. At some point,
yeah,
your body just keeps going and trying to overcome that mental resistance or that urge to just kind of quit. Um,
yeah,
so, but to your point about what gives us that motivation to face those challenges? That's it's something that I found really interesting in the work from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, on his work on flow, and he
mm,
talks about how um, well, it's a combination of it needs to be pleasurable. It needs to be something you're interested in, like the things that you do that put you into that flow state. But it also
yeah,
needs to be challenging, right? So I think part of what motivates people, at least ambitious people or people who've participated in sports or have achieved something, is they like to be in that flow state. and
yeah,
um, and so I think for well, I guess you talk about runner's high too. I think those can be things that
yeah,
motivate you to get that that dopamine rush, the endorphins going. All that can be part of the motivation. But I think the way I look at, well, I think I see the word motivation from two different angles. So there's that thing that you just mentioned, finding your drive, the drive that pushes you to do the things that you want to do.
mm,
And then the other element of motivation that I look at, and I've written about, is um, has to do with intention. It has to do with the why, where you're,
hmm,
you're going, what motivated you there in terms of what was your intention, and then
yeah,
motivation in terms of that drive to move forward. So I kind of look at it from both sides, and maybe we can touch on both of those things today. But I
yeah,
think most people, when they talk about motivation, are talking about finding that drive. And I think when
yeah,
you look at a lack of motivation, sometimes it may be just a lack of interest or a lack of curiosity, but it can also be a lot of resistance, right? And looking at what are the barriers. I for a while there, I was coaching youth, like young people who through the Hamburg school system here, and
Hmm.
the first meeting was always with a parent or parents, and I had this one case where this. I think he was 14 or 15, and his mom said, "Yeah, he's kind of lazy," and I said, "Really?" So I hate that. I hate when people describe themselves or others as lazy, because that's kind of like saying, well, that's something you were born with, it's just an attribute.
Yeah.
And so I tried to reframe it for them and go, well, is it that he's lazy, or is it that he's lacking motivation, right?
Mm.
And so when you can try and reframe it that way, then it's, motivation is a state, and you can change that. You can find more of it. But laziness almost is like a label. And so I don't know. Anybody ever called you lazy? I know you don't strike me as someone anyone ever calls lazy.
Well, I've probably called myself lazy at times when I feel really lazy, and when you compare with yourself with others,
Hmm.
sometimes. But no, I guess people don't call me lazy. But what? Uh, I was thinking, I mean, because you mentioned a few things about motivation, I think we can touch upon a lot of different things. But the one that I wanted to connect back to was, yeah, the purpose of the why. And we talked about this before a little bit in our previous conversations about how important it is to understand the purpose, and how it might be connected to your values, of course. But to having a clarity around that in itself can be extremely motivating to understand why you're actually doing something and why it's important to you. And I think a lot of people who are maybe losing their motivation or lacking a motivation is in, not always of course, but many times it's because you're losing sight of why you're actually doing things. If things are just becoming a routine and you're doing it over and over again, and you don't see the purpose for doing it, then of course that's going to be, if you're an autopilot for too long, it takes away some of that motivation, right?
Yeah, those thankless jobs, the chores that you have to do. And that's where, again, coming back to Mihai Csikszentmihalyi in his book on flow, he talks about turning things into a game, right?
Yeah.
Making, uh, like measuring yourself versus last time, or like, it can be something as mundane as doing the dishes, and, putting some kind of methodology to it. I think that, or seeing how fast you can get it done, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's
You
something
start with
he,
5 minutes, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Or having some kind of a routine behind it. There's all kinds of little games you can play with yourself to help with the sort of mundane things, because there's plenty of things maintenance things that I don't enjoy doing, and I do feel some resistance, and I do find it difficult sometimes to get the motivation to do it. So like doing your taxes, things like that. I don't think
Yeah.
there's many people
But
who
also,
have.
but also, one thing that I think it's really important to well to talk about, but also to have a little bit of awareness about that. Sometimes it's again, when we're talking about ultra marathon runner, there's this ultra marathon runner called Scott Jurek. And I think his father said, sometimes you just got to do things, right? And that became a little bit of a mantra for. I mean, mentally, he's been enormously strong. But like sometimes you just got to do stuff. Sometimes you just got to get things done. And I don't know if it's a purpose for it, or maybe it's not very developing for you, but you just got to get things done. Sometimes you can check it off a list or whatever it is. But that's also a little bit of the grit that I think it's important to develop at times.
Hmm.
And sometimes, for me personally, sometimes I feel I have it, and sometimes I feel like I don't have it. But really trying to, when it's there, just really try to push through and get some stuff done, because it easing things up for other things, right? It clears the sheet a little bit.
Yeah, when people come to me and have a question about motivation, or point to areas where they seem to lack that motivation, or they talk about discipline, and I think, I'm not a huge fan of discipline. I think you can build routines and habits into your life that will help you avoid having to be super disciplined. Sometimes people talk about me as if I was really disciplined, and I don't think I am. I just create the right habits, and then I don't think about it. And I think that's a really important point that I make to people is, when do you negotiate whether you're going to do something or not, right? When you set out to have a run in the morning, I'm sure you're not waking up going, do I want to go for a run this morning? You probably have planned it before. And I think that's the thing. When you can make the commitment to yourself before actually doing it, and then when it comes to doing it, don't start to renegotiate. It's a mental habit. It's a mental process. And so really recognizing when your motivation is strong or when you're focused, making that commitment to yourself then, and then when the time comes to do it, avoid renegotiating or rethinking or even making it an option not to do a particular thing, right? So, I mean that's a tip that I give people who, for kind of the things that are more chores, the daily things that you want to get done. I find that's a really helpful one. Do you have any other tips or tricks that you use?
I mean, for these kind of stuff, it's well, I mean, I don't know why, but today I'm going back to running a lot. But there's something that I find really helpful for me is it's related to running, but it's the sense of do a workout or run every day. I mean, and I saw this. It was an English gentleman. He ran 1 mile, so that's what 1.6 kilometers or something. At least at least one English mile every day for more than 50 years. For a lot of people to run a mile, what does it take? 10 minutes or something? So it's not the time commitment isn't huge, and it's not about if you're gonna do it. It's just when you're gonna do it. So just do it. And if it's a very short period of time, it just becomes so much easier, and then you can do the other stuff that is important. But if you make that a priority, it just it gets you going. And typically, I mean, if you run for 10 minutes, you might realize that I can run for 30 minutes, so you might go a little bit further or whatever it is. But I think that helps me a lot to do these. Just commit for a short time frame and just get it done. And it's not if, it's just get it done, and then it creates space somehow.
Yeah.
And then for me, if you create that kind of sustainability and sense of achievement, you feel a lot better, and then other things get easier too.
Absolutely. And a lot of people will do things like they'll have their running gear or their shoes already ready to go. So it's a reminder, but there's no extra steps to take. It's already prepared for you there. There's also some really great great recommendations. There's I think he's a behavioral psychologist, BJ Fogg, and he basically looked at using existing habits or triggers to change behavior, and so if you're trying to find the motivation to do something new or create a new habit, using triggers that you already have throughout your day. So one example that he likes to give is, he every time he went to the washroom, he did at least 2 push-ups, right? And then it started with 2, and then 4, and then 10, and then 20, and pretty soon he was doing 100 push-ups a day, right? So he just used that trigger of something that's going to happen throughout your day, and then he used that to do push-ups. And you can tie that to any kind of behavior that you want to develop. And then it doesn't take a ton of willpower. It doesn't take a lot of motivation. It just becomes integrated in your habits because you're using an existing trigger. So there are a lot of little mental habits you can use that that you don't have to develop all this willpower and motivation in order to get started. So I find that's a super helpful one to just recognize where the triggers are, and then use those to, if you're wanting to develop new behaviors, or if you're finding it hard to be consistent in something that you want to be doing on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I didn't foresee that our conversation is going to go here, but it's now we're kind of talking about motivation is a factor for personal behavioral change somehow,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Then of course, I mean it's really important and on an individual level to find out or to figure out what is obstructing us or might be supporting us to do these small changes in our personal lives to make things a little bit easier or achieve what it is that we want to achieve. And typically that's quite small things, right? I want to work out more, or I want to be better at cooking, or whatever it is. But if I draw that back a little bit to what we started by about what's the purpose, why are we doing this? And I think it's so much about the development goals we set for ourselves. And something there's something in there that I also find really helpful with uh, talking about and discussing this growth mindset, right? So,
Mhm.
what uh, I mean, Carol Dweck talks about this in a great way that if we it's not a pass or a not pass, it's not yet. So I'm not yet there yet, but what do I have to do to continue to develop myself to be able to put myself in the state where I want to get to? And there's a lot around that where we can help ourselves, but also with others, I think. I mean, if we're leaders or developing teams or whatever it is, to see how we can develop ourselves and others, supporting ourselves to make steps into the to reaching our purpose or that goal we might have set for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Mindset does play a big role in motivation, or in the lack of it, creating that barrier. Because as Carol Dweck talks about, you having that growth mindset is, well, I don't know how to do it yet, but I could learn. Whereas the fixed mindset being, well, I'm not good at that,
Mm,
or that's not really my thing, or
exactly.
so you're already defining what you're creating limits for yourself without even having tried.
Mm,
So I agree. Mindset is important, in recognizing where the resistance lies. And the other thing that I think is really important because people will say, well, I'm open minded, I don't have a fixed mindset. She really points out that you may have a growth mindset in one area of your life and not have it in another, right? So
exactly. Yeah.
it's so funny when people talk about being really open-minded, and then you push them out of their comfort zone in one area where they're not comfortable, move beyond, and then it becomes, you start to recognize, well, you've got a fixed mindset there, you're creating limits for
Mm,
yourself there. And so I think that's a really good thing to reflect on. And you've come back to purpose a couple of times, and I think that's what I really wanted to talk about today for sure is Dan Pink's work, or his book Drive, and he's done a great TED talk, and
mm,
especially when I talk to leaders and managers about motivating their teams, and people use the typical kind of incentives like bonuses and those
mhm.
kind of things. And I really like the way he kind of sums it up and really backs it up with the research that's been done, uh,
Yeah.
when you take, especially in the workplace. And I think this is important, not only for leaders, but it's also for people who are looking to find more motivation in their job, in their workplace. When you take money off of the table, like you've got enough to cover your rent and pay your bills and put food on the table. When money is not a factor, then there are three pillars, and you know these as well. So
Mm,
you covered one: purpose. There's autonomy, so having that sense that you can be self-directed in some way, to at least to some degree. And some companies will cover this by, you're allowed to have a certain amount of flexible time, or you can plan your own schedule, or it's not important when you come into work, as long as you get your job done, or you still work your however many hours. Not
mm,
every company can do that, but having some degree of self-direction, whether it's the projects you can work on to some degree, and so on. And then the other piece is really important, and a lot of people forget this, is mastery. And mastery, obviously, is this is trying to achieve mastery at something, but it's more about the getting there, right? This whole process of becoming better at something with the eventual goal of mastering it, or not, but at least striving for that. And Dan Pink points out how, why do people learn instruments when they're never as an adult, when they're never going to be a professional, or why do you learn how to do anything that you do just as a hobby, just for the fun of it, right? And that's just the whole sense of being able to learn a new skill and get good at it. Is a really, and so those three, the autonomy, mastery, and purpose are those three pillars that they've identified as being the most fundamental in motivation. And he even, in the research shows that, when you increase these financial incentives, it actually, the results become worse. People become, whether it's putting too much pressure on themselves, it actually creates more resistance to their motivation. They may self-sabotage or whatever. So I found that super interesting. It was a revelation for me when I first read his book and listened to his TED Talk. And when it's funny, people's jaws drop sometimes when you give them the details and the facts, and they go, really, because it just goes against our mental model of what motivation is. And we live in a society where money is important, so you would think that's a key driver in getting people to show initiative, but clearly it's only very small.
It still is a driver.
Sure.
But if we look at the hierarchy of needs from Maslow's, obviously those fundamental needs that they're not so relevant in our, at least in the Western world, in developed rich countries, we don't really have to worry about those fundamental needs to that extent. It's much more about tapping into that. The higher needs and where you're talking about self-fulfillment, and when you talk about mastery, for instance, it's what we're talking about, to be able to develop yourself further, to challenge yourself, to reach these goals, and why do you want to become better at playing guitar? Why do you want to run a sub 3-hour marathon or whatever it is, right? So and that I connect that a lot with the growth mindset, to have the will to become better and better at something. One thing that I think when we talk about the work of Dan Pink, and he's basing his work on years and years of previous research. He's summarizing it in a really good way. But I think that one thing that a lot of people kind of get wrong sometimes is because what is it? Mastery, autonomy, and purpose, right? In another context, I've been working with that material, and we don't talk about purpose, but we talk about relatedness, which is, it connects with the purpose, but not only. It's about what is your relation to the purpose, but also to the relatedness to the social context, to the people around you. And I think, as a leader or in a team or in an organization, what kind of groundwork do you have for psychological safety and for conversations? And that taps into more of these transformational leadership behaviors. So when we're talking about really effective leadership, talking about transformational leadership behaviors, that taps into that intrinsic motivation to be able to develop people, to challenge people, to support people and the organization to achieve long-term goals that are meaningful, that are fun. Actually, that's a really big part of it as well. If you look at that research, to have fun and purpose, that's two really motivating things as well. But also to be challenging, right? And of course, this the more human part, to feel encouraged, to create that sense of autonomy. So for me, in a lot of the work that I do with leaders, and we talk about motivation, we connect it a lot to the transformational leadership behaviors that are sort of cultivating that intrinsic motivation for people. However, just one more thing on that. uh, if when I have these kind of conversations in the Chinese context, you always get that pushback. But well, hang on a minute. If I go to another firm, I'm going to get a 30% salary increase. Are you telling me that that's not going to be a motivator? And of course it is, right? I mean uh, that is a really strong motivator, and also in the social context, that if you have expectations from family and friends to, it's a very competitive environment. So money is more of a factor there than it would be in Sweden, for instance. I mean, it's a really big difference. So money is a factor, but it's okay because it's on the table, what you
Mm.
mentioned before, right? If you take that away, so if it's not an issue, then we can talk more about the intrinsic motivators. But if it's not really, if this security and the social construct isn't really there yet, it's still really important.
Yeah, I think there are certainly cultural differences in terms of motivation, but you covered a lot of stuff there, that I hope I'll
Sorry.
remember all the points that I. No, no, it's great. I think it's good. I think the first of all, to address the whole thing about money, a lot of times it will be, certainly if if you are struggling financially, then money is going to be a motivator. I mean, it's just naturally you want to strive for a better life, especially if you have dependents. You want to give your kids a better life, I think. But then it's not even just the money; it's what the money can do. So I always like to ask people, well, what does money represent for you? For some people, it represents freedom. For some, it just represents security. So I think there's probably a deeper motivation than just the money itself. It's what the money represents. But I
Yeah.
think when you talk about someone changing their job because of money, I think there's a lot of people that if they're, and maybe this is different in China. I don't have enough experience. I don't have the same level of experience in China as you do, and Asian countries. I do know from my travels through Asia, that when I was backpacking years ago through Asia, and meeting everyday people who, it seemed to me, and this is a very subjective opinion, but it seemed to me that I could have offered those people, come to Europe and get you a great job, and they would probably, they seemed very happy and content having their family unit, their support, and maybe that's just an outside, subjective view that doesn't get to the heart of it. But my sense of it was that in a lot of these countries, especially where there's this, Buddhism is the prominent religion, they do seem to, that's a cultural mindset where, about fate and karma, and this is my lot in life and I accept it. I think,
Hmm.
Nietzsche talks about that when he talks about amor fati, the love of your fate sort of thing, and so that can be part of it. And then the whole thing about money in terms of changing jobs, there are just a lot of people who it's short-sighted. So if, let's say that, they are already doing well, and they're comfortable, but the reason they're changing is, well, it's a big opportunity, 20% more money or 30%, I think was the number you put on it.
Yeah.
But then they move to a company where they're really unhappy, but they're making more money. How long will that level of motivation sustain? The motivation,
Yeah.
so there we go back to the whole thing about intention, right? So the intention
Mm.
was to move thinking that the financial gain will be more, and probably I'll be just as happy at that job as this one, but then not anticipating that there'll be cultural differences, or the type of work, may be different, or just the environment where you're working in may not be as good as it was before. So once you make that jump upwards, and it's always relative. Even today we talk about, relative poverty. People who are
Mm.
considered under the poverty line, and yet they still have cell phones and microwaves, and things that even wealthy people didn't have 30 years ago,
Yeah.
or 40 years ago. I don't know. So that's relative. And then, so the last point, sorry, I'm trying to think of all the different things I was thinking as you were running through the different things, making things relevant, and not talking about purpose, but relatable, I think was the word that you used.
Relatedness, yeah.
Relatedness, yeah. I think relatedness, to me, the way you talked about it, represents kind of that people can, it's relevant for them, you know. So something can't motivate you if it doesn't interest you, isn't important to you, doesn't really get you going. And so, you know, everybody talks about SMART objectives, and the one thing in SMART is the whole relevance. You know, you can have all those other, you know, specific, achievable,
Yeah.
and time bound and all that.
Measurable.
But if it's not relevant to you, like, then why am I doing this? You know, if it's
Yeah.
just a task, do it for the sake of doing it. It's not always a good motivator for people. So, so relevance, I think, is also a really important point. I think those are all the things I wanted to say to the points that you brought up. I hope I covered them all.
No, but I'm sure we're going to come back to some of those things. But one thing that I thought about when you mentioned also, I mean, we're getting back to the purpose here all the time. I realize that, but it's interesting.
It's
I
a
mean,
big driver.
when you think about, okay, a salary increase, why is that important? And this is, uh, I mean, it can be different things, but an example that I always take, but when we talk about coaching, that we always start with a goal and really digging into the objective of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it might start out with, yeah, I want to have a salary increase, right? Well, okay, so why is that important to you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that in coaching we shouldn't ask the why question, but we formulate them in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, so it's well, it might be that if I have money, I have the perception that I can, you know, live a more luxurious life. You know, well, what's important about that? It might be about status, or it might be about, I don't know, being able to show off so I can attract a boyfriend or a girlfriend, so I can get married, or you know. But when you peel off those layers of the onion and really get into the core issue, I agree that very seldom it's the monetary value itself that is important. However, I mean, in the examples that I just took, it's very often that okay, I need to earn money because my friends are earning more money, my family is giving me pressure because people around me are they see people around me are earning more money, so it's this kind of social competition going on.
Mm.
Of course, I think that's settling more and more and more. But you know, I just want to say that money can still be an issue. But I really agree with that. That if you, as I mentioned, if you start peeling that onion, very seldom I think it's the monetary value itself that is the actual motivator.
Yeah, I think that whole thing about striving for more, and that social construct of you know, keeping up with the Joneses, or have that sense of status, and I think that's more relevant in some cultures. Well, I think it's in all kind of market-driven capitalistic societies, you'll have that, and that has its pros and cons. But I think that at some point people realize that it's, you know, just having the new stuff is not, or having the, you know, having something that your neighbor doesn't have, that's only satisfies you for an instant, and then you're, you know, a lot of these people who are, you know, I even think about you know, kids when they get a new gift, it's exciting for how long, and then they're on to the new thing, right? Yeah. Especially when people have so much that can draw their attention in different ways. How many, like, you have kids, and I saw my godson last week, and you know, he really had saved up his money. He was having this discussion with his mom about spending all his savings on this. I think it was a Nerf gun or something like that. And it is like, and how, you know, it's this, really got to have it because his brother was going to get one, and so you can already see it within the family unit, and I know, like, these are kids that have lots of stuff, and they're not spoiled, but they have lots of stuff. And their attention it'll be cool for a week, and then, you know, and then you're on to the next thing. So it's important to recognize, and this is where you're talking about goals, and I mean, what are goals for? They're to gain more clarity, right? To know exactly what you're going for. And I think the why question is important, and to reflect on, okay, what is it that's motivating? What is it that's driving me to this thing? And if you start to look at your goals and the things you aspire to, and look at what's driving you there, if it's this external pressure to succeed, or these external expectations, or wanting to be as important, as successful, sort of meeting these kind of expectations you set for yourself, but also wanting to have the admiration or have the acknowledgement or whatever it is. And if you start to look at, okay, well, why is that important to me? What are the inner signals? What are the deficits that I'm trying to compensate for? Or, I mean, they're not saying that that's always the case, but those are things you can start to ask yourself, because when it comes to living a happy life and being, authentically happy, you find that all those things don't really matter. And when people sometimes come to me for coaching, especially kind of reaching middle age, or sometimes for some people it'll be in their 30s, sometimes it'll be their, getting into their 40s, and they'll come to me and go, I got the university degree, I've got the partner, I've got kids, got the house, I got the job, but I'm still not happy. And maybe they have some of those things and not all, but they realize they've checked a bunch of boxes. And what motivated them was this vision of what happiness and what success means, and they never really reflected on what it meant to them, and so they found the motivation in this dream, in this idea, and then when they got to what they thought the idea was going to deliver, it wasn't there. So that's why it's important to recognize the things that are motivating you to do the things you're doing, so that you can save yourself some disappointment maybe, but certainly not find yourself suddenly, a lot of things, people have these really good motivations to do certain things, and then they kind of build this construct and then realize they're not happy, but don't have any way of getting out, don't know how to step out or change direction, right? So that's why I do think, recognizing what your motivation is, what your intention is in doing the things you're doing, because without clarity on that, without knowing not only the goal, but why that goal is important to you, I think you can quickly get off track, and you can suddenly build this life for yourself, or just like, I'm changing jobs for 30% more money. Wow, that's a big improvement. But what's that going to get you, and what are the trade-offs, and so the motivations and understanding what that will lead to and what the consequences are.
Yeah, I think it's really important also to realize that to distinguish what that is can be extremely difficult. On an individual level. So I think that this is important for me, and I have this idea that this is really important for me. But how do you know? Right? How can you be sure if it's that? And I think that's a lot of the interesting conversations that we might be having with clients and leaders or professionals. How do you know? And there's a lot of doubt for myself. So that's one point of being able to, or help ourselves to distinguish just for ourselves, what's really important and what's motivating me, and why am I doing this, and how does that connect with my purpose and what I want to achieve or whatever. But then also, imagine how difficult that is for leaders, and this is one of these constant question or challenges, I think, for leaders, like, how do I motivate my staff? And and if we're talking about financial rewards, and we just talked about, so I only have this much financial rewards. What else can I do? I tried that. Nothing works. What do you do? Mm-hmm. And so, first of all, realizing that it's very difficult, but then the length of things that you really have to invest in and try to figure out to support the people around you, to help them to become motivated and achieve things. It's a really big task. right?
Oh, for sure it is. I don't deny that. I think whether it's motivating yourself or motivating others, so part of it comes back to the conversation we had on values, because your
Mm,
core values are such a big factor in driving your behaviors. Um, but in terms of someone in a leadership position who's trying to motivate their team, there are lots of different levers you can try and pull, right? And
yeah.
the easiest one or the most obvious one are incentives, right? Financial incentives.
Mm,
Um, but for some people, the what the financial reward means is they, you know, they kind of associate that number, whether it's euro, dollars, kroner in Sweden, that's almost like saying, well, that's my value, right? And for them, it's like I'm a more valuable person based on how much money I make, and so recognizing if that's a belief that you have, that's a little precarious, because if you lose your job for whatever reason out of your control, that mean you have no more value, right?
mm,
So yeah, so there's that part of it, and I think it's always going to be a combination of things, and that's why it's
yeah.
always important to look at it systemically, right? So,
Mm,
sure, money's great, but is money great without the fun? Is money great without the growth opportunities and learning and ways you can expand your knowledge? Is money important if you are in a very rigid system and you don't have any freedom or autonomy, right? So that's
mm,
why, obviously, we talked about those three pillars of motivation. All of them are important, and when I and I've coached people, I've had companies that have hired me to coach their senior managers, and then the manager will kind of admit to me that actually he's wanting to change jobs, right? And so
yeah.
at that point, that person's my client. So so I'm not trying to influence his decision. I'm trying to help him find clarity, because
Yeah.
if I try and convince somebody to stay in a job that they're not happy in, then it's a lose-lose for the employee
Sure.
uh, um, and the company. But I asked them to look at those three. Does your current job, which one of those three boxes is it not ticking? And in
Mm,
a new role, are you sure you can tick all those three boxes of autonomy, mastery, purpose? And
mm,
then the money piece again. It's about knowing, is this about self-esteem? Is this about giving a monetary value to my value as a person, or the work that I do? Maybe it's acknowledgement that people are looking for, right? So these are all these levers that you can try and pull. So for some people, they would never change because they're super happy. The business that they're in feels like a
mm,
family, right? It's a the
yeah.
culture of what they call the clan culture,
Mm,
and for some people wouldn't take more money in exchange for that environment ever. So
yeah.
yeah, it depends on what drives you. I have a cousin who works in California in the IT sector, and he's constantly getting headhunted by one company will offer more, and the work I guess is fairly similar, and so I guess if company culture, I don't know, I haven't had a deep conversation with him about it, but certainly for some people the financial rewards, because they see only moderate variance in the type of work environment they're in. I guess at
Mm,
really high levels, it maybe doesn't matter to some people, right? They just
yeah.
it's the new challenge and it's the financial rewards. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just being clear on that on that. There's always trade-offs, right? So what are you giving
Mm,
up in order for that, and that'll help you define or get clear on what your motivations are. Not
yeah.
everybody knows.
No, and I think you're on to one point that I think is really important as well, is that the role of the organizational culture, or and even maybe the culture in the team. But this is and that taps into that relatedness that we talked about. This
Mm.
is a culture that I can relate to, where I feel comfortable yet challenged. Maybe I have enough autonomy. I can my competency is recognized, and I can utilize it, and aligned with the values. I mean, people say that some people say the organizational culture is kind of a, the you can't change it, you can't influence it, but it's for motivation. I think it's extremely important, to that this is a culture where I choose to stay, or that I aspire to dedicate myself to, or whatever it is. So,
Mm.
and of course, the leaders here, they play a really big role in nurturing and creating this culture, right?
Absolutely.
Uh, and again, I mean, for me, maybe I'm answering my own question a little bit here, but when we talked about, how what can leaders do to motivate, motivate others, and I think again, it goes back to these many of these transformational leadership behaviors when it comes to, of course, being honest and being a role model, visionary, being challenging, empowering, extremely important, but also recognizing and recognizing and encouraging people. So it really ticks a lot of these boxes to create, um, an environment where you're listened to, you're recognized, and you have the autonomy to to use your full competence, and to develop your competences.
Yeah, I think there's some basic things that you can do right. That everybody wants to have some level of acknowledgement. People want a sense of security. For some people, loyalty is a value. So there's some fundamental things you can do right, in terms of creating the right culture and the right environment, and then that automatically creates some level of motivation. But beyond that, it's I guess I was trying to get at in terms of there's all these different levers. There isn't really a template, right? I think
No.
it's a matter of listening, becoming a good listener, recognizing what drives the people that you're leading, managing, coaching, and try and tap into that, and sort of recognizing those differences. The one thing that I did want to touch on today, as part of the motivation conversation, is I think the biggest resistance that we have, the biggest thing that stands in the way of our motivation, and it's also, in terms of intention, one of the most negative things in terms of motivation, is fear. So that's a really big one in terms of, when you look at the kinds of things that fear makes people do, right? It motivates them to, be dishonest, to be deceitful, when you think about all the worst things people ever do, you can trace them back to some form of fear. So I think that's really important when you're talking about motivation, as a driver. When fear is the thing that's driving you, it's never going to lead you to a good place. So recognizing your own fears is an important one. And then when it comes to a lack of motivation or a resistance to doing what you're trying to do, also noticing when that is fear, when you're not motivated to action, you're actually, as you know, the fear, is the fight, flight, or freeze response. And so when you're seeing that, and you recognize that fear is motivating that behavior, that's a really important one. And when you start to realize that, what is holding you back most in your motivation is a fear. The fear is, you don't really overcome it until you look it in the eye, right? You just have to,
Yeah.
address it, and that takes people out of their comfort zones. So I think fear in relation to motivation is a really important one, not only to understand what's driving people to do, what's driving people's behaviors, but also what's creating the resistance for people not to be motivated.
Yeah, interesting point. I mean, fear. I do think. I mean, fear can be an extremely strong motivator.
Oh,
I
for
mean,
sure.
you're putting yourself in survival mode. I mean, that's one of the most, one of the strongest motivators you might come across.
Mm.
However, of course, it's not sustainable, right? And if you have an environment where you're in fear, or if you're, yes, sort of swimming in fear all the time, it's not going to create very sustainable and positive results over the. It might it might lead you out through a crisis or something, but it's very important to, as you say, being able to face that fear and create a constructive narrative around, what can we do about it, or a strategic, conscious choice of how to deal with it, and that's where we become more proactive with the motivation. But yeah,
Sure. I think fear
to be
can
stuck in that fear, that's
yeah.
tough.
I think fear can be a call to action for sure, and it can kind of wake you up. And sometimes it's the bigger of two fears that will get people to go in one direction or the other. Um, but I think if you're thinking long term and you're trying to develop good behavioral habits and you're looking for healthy motivation, I don't think that that fear is a healthy motivation. I think it certainly it can be it can be one that can be productive. It can be one but if you're constantly relying on fear to motivate you, I mean, sure, there are some people who need that adrenaline and need that kind of fear-based rush in order to get them to take action, but it's never going to really make you productive in the long term. I admit, for me, I mean, when someone asks me, what's my biggest fear in life, and my biggest fear is not achieving my full potential. And so, sure, you could say that part of my motivation in doing some of the things, I work a lot and I do a lot of different things. Sometimes I wonder why I can't just, focus on one thing. I know I make a decent living at it. I know, there's no, but why do I then go off and do these writing projects, do these volunteer things, do these, all these, why do I do them all? Well, there's a combination of things, but certainly there's a small element of, well, I want to make sure I'm achieving my full potential, right? So there's part of that drives me.
Yeah.
But for the most part, the things that I pursue are things that I'm passionate about. It's not that I work on these writing projects because I'm afraid what'll happen if I don't, or it's not like I do the coaching or the any of these training projects because of some kind of fear, right? And it's more and more less about the money. It's more about having the right. I'm really grateful and privileged to be able to pick and choose projects to work on. And so, yeah, for me, I guess when you talk about the motivation of money, I've gotten myself in a position where, I guess through reputation or experience or whatever, I have a selection of different things I can be working on. So money becomes less of a factor for me. If I was worrying about how I'm going to pay the rent, it would be a bigger factor. So, so yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's fear, there's elements of fear in all of that, but I think if you're consistently using fear to motivate you, that's what I mean about that being a negative factor.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that I haven't really thought about before. But I mean, fear as, I think we talked about false assumptions at some point before. And there's this instrument that I've been working with called Leadership Circle, it's a fantastic 360 tool. And it's really interesting because you have two sides, and on the lower sides you have basically behaviors that are driven by fears or false assumptions that are, they're motivating us, but not in a very constructive way, or actually in a quite destructive way. And very simply put, they are complied into controlling behaviors. And avoiding behaviors and complying behaviors that all of us will probably have. And it seems like from a very young age, we develop strategies of how we behave or deal with situations where we're put under stress. And that's a little bit of facing your fears, or actually that your fears are controlling you. but it's real. So what's great with this instrument, that you have the flip side, or the, the positive side, the constructive side, where you look at behaviors where you are creating your own outcomes and tapping into that motivators. And it's a lot about authenticity, but also, I mean, systems thinking, visionary thinking, with your social constructs, etc. And if you look at the efficiency of motivating others, and leadership effectiveness, all of these on the constructive side, they're very positively correlated with leadership effectiveness, while the other ones, the more fear driven, then are the total opposite. So I mean, that gives you a really clear picture of how negative the fears can be, but they're quite common, and we all go there, right?
Mm.
We all, especially when we become a little bit pressured, it's really easy to get into that fear-driven mode. Not by choice, of course, but it's the word, the way the body functions. I mean, you talked about fight, flight, or freeze before. It's exactly these kind of behaviors. But then when you realize that, okay, I actually have that choice, and then we're getting into that paradigm shift of creating your own constructive behaviors, enabled to having a more positive impact on yourself and others. I mean, it's really powerful, and it's easy to talk about, very difficult to do, of course, but starting with that awareness. But I mean, with self-motivating, but also then for leaders too, what kind of motivating impact you have on other people, because it's extraordinary how big role the leader can play here in an organizational context, of course.
But think about the organizations that you've worked with or been involved with, where fear is the core driver. People fear the CEO, or they fear the top management. And in terms of things like, well, am I going to have my job? Could I be fired tomorrow for some, just because my boss got up on the wrong side of the bed, or whatever. And this is where trust comes in big time. This whole, like, let's take an example of when companies automatically try and hit their financial targets by redundancies, layoffs, getting rid of people, restructuring, right? What does that do to the company culture? So all of a sudden people are like, oh, I could be next. So then you're fear driven, and some people want to create that kind of environment. They think that that'll keep people hungry, but what does that do? That creates people. They're not collaborative. They're not creative. They cover their own back. They work in silos. I mean, these are the cultural things that develop when you have this fear as a main motivator within your organization, right? That you could lose your job, that that you're going to get reprimanded. And if you think about, if you then kind of play that out into broader society, so many things are like the law is all about. If you don't follow the law, you'll get punished, right? Fear driven, right? Rather than having these positive incentives, but that's changing. There's more and more things where I think we're realizing on an organizational and societal level that if you can have positive reinforcements, people, it will bring out people's better nature. And people, I think my philosophy is most people, unless they're psychopaths, most people want to do the right thing. Most people want to be productive, can make a positive contribution, be of value, and if you focus on those things and you create positive motivations, you're going to have a better organization, you're going to have a better culture in your community, and so on. If you're constantly just pushed by fear, people are going to be very... Look, we talked before about what fear does to you. It makes you paranoid. It gives you tunnel vision. It gets you very focused for a short period, but in the long term, you don't see all the opportunities and all the options. So that's why when you look at fear as a motivator, I think it's a super important one. But it becomes such a default. People, from the time you're a kid, your parents are like, if you do that, you're going to get in trouble, right? So
Yeah.
you're already putting the punishment out there, and instead of finding a positive way. I mean, when I work with, it's not a fair comparison, but when I work with dogs, right? Dogs will always respond better to positive reinforcement than if you're always just trying to motivate them out of fear. And some people believe in, the kind of people that will then have a dog that they want to instill fear into. You're going to have an aggressive, vicious dog a lot of times, right? Or a fearful, and so it's just, you can look at through any conscious being will never respond as well to fear as they do to some kind of reward, some kind of positive reinforcement. And so that's a factor in motivation for me.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think it's only for you. I think I agree. I mean, we can look at any kind of research that will tell you that I mean, what we're talking about here is what actually works in motivation. I think the problem is that, I mean, I'm a parent. I'm to some extent, I'm a leader. I'm working with leaders. It's really tough. It's really tiring. It's really difficult to be on that constructive level all the time. We're all humans. We're tired. We get emotional. Of course, I mean, we're gonna get lazy, and then it's much easier to go into a more directive style of leadership or commanding or whatever, and that's going to have a negative impact on motivation. But if you want to be that, again, I'm going back to, let's say I want to be much more of a transformational leader. It takes an effort. You know, you really have to care with your head and heart and everything.
For
And
sure.
it takes a lot of energy.
Oh, absolutely, it
So
does.
so then, yeah, going back to the question, are you lazy or not?
Are you lazy? Well, look, it's when it comes down to that, motivation, priorities is also another one, right? How when people talk about what's one of the biggest excuses people have for not doing things that they would say they want to do? It's, I don't have enough time. And so language, I think, is another important one for motivation. Not to go off on too many tangents here, but when someone talks about, I don't have enough time, no, you haven't made it a priority. We all have 24 hours in the day, and you know that you've allocated your time, or you've given other things a bigger priority with the allocation of time that you have. So that's one thing, and I think I've actually brought it up before, but language in terms of, I tend to really point out frequently to people how when people talk about things in terms of obligation, I have to, I should, and then they that in itself will cause resistance to your motivation. I don't know what you were like as a teen, but I know when I was a teenager, when my parents told me to do something, quite often it would be there would be a resistance. You know, you have to do this, and I would rebel against it, or I would avoid it, or whatever, or do the opposite. And I think some of that still remains within us when we it takes away a sense of our freedom and choice when we are always doing things out of obligation. I have to, I should. And so I really encourage people to change their inner dialogue and their external language that they use. And they talk about things in terms of, I can, I want to, and I will, right? So, or you can ask yourself, when you're not feeling motivated, can I do this? Do I want to do it? And will I do it, is making that commitment. So, and I'll bring it up again, I'm sure, in the future, because I think language is a really important piece when we're telling ourselves that everything's out of obligation or out of fear. I have to do this or else. Instead, if you can take a lot of power back. You can you can reinforce the fact that you're not a victim. This is a choice, and that is motivating in itself. When you can start to really look at the actions you're taking in your life and feel in control of it. That's very empowering and very motivating. So that's why I think language is an important piece of that, and just reminding yourself that it's a choice. There's nothing I have to do. There's nothing I have to do. I don't have to go to work. And people will go, yeah, but if I don't go to work, I won't get paid, and I can't pay my rent. And yeah, but that's still a choice. You just don't like the consequences of making that choice, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Yeah, I totally fully agree, and I think about this a lot as well. I mean, as a parent, you know, I for instance, if my daughter wants to play for a while, I can't. I have to work or whatever. But of
Mm.
course, then I frequently do that. For me, work is important, so I choose to work now, but I'm going to play with you later. And also, again, I want to relate this to the organizational context of imagine. I mean, if you're sitting in a meeting and your leader is saying, well, we have to hit these numbers and we have to do this and this, or otherwise it's going to be consequences, or, you know, having a constructive conversation, something like, if we do this, we can, what can we achieve? What are we are able to construct or to accomplish together?
Mm.
If by doing this and this and this, I mean, it's the same thing, but two completely different stories. And for the motivational aspect of it, of course, it makes a really big difference.
Yeah.
And it's so much in the language. I agree, totally agree. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you can say, we have to hit these numbers or else, some of us may lose our jobs or some of us may get demoted. Or look, as a team, we could achieve these numbers and we could be the best team in the organization. Or, we'll have gained so much trust of the leadership team or the board members or we'll hit our bonus. Yeah. Back to the money as a motivator. Sure. Yeah, we can hit bonus. And for some people, that's a nice motivator. But as long as you're including elements of achievement and, growth, and maybe it's acknowledgement or creating security. I mean, all of those things can be motivating factors, and it's all in how you frame it, how you talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, That's gonna be the theme for today, to have a constructive language.
Good. Yeah. Look, I catch myself all the time, especially I find in the German language here when I do speak German, it just comes up so often that, ich muss, I must is like just so prevalent here in the language. And so I find myself falling into that trap as well, but I'm aware of it. And I think, with everything, the key to change is awareness, right? Awareness allows change. And so with motivation, it's about recognizing what are the things that are motivating me and what are the things that are standing in the way of my motivation. So, I think actually that's probably a great place to kind of wrap it up. I love the conversation of motivation, obviously, because I'm working as a coach. You do it becomes a big aspect, but I don't think we want to run on to 2 hours. But anyway, I think maybe if we can just kind of sum up, what do we want to leave people with? Point them in the right, or remind them of some of the things we've covered today. So obviously, for me, awareness is one of them. Being aware of what's motivating you, and what's standing in your way. What about you? What things would you want people to take away from our conversation today?
It's a few things. I think I mentioned at some point this when I talked about Scott Jurek, that sometimes you just have to do things. But again, what we just ended up with, I mean, thinking about it in a constructive way. So I'm choosing to do this because I'm gonna. So it's always a choice, right? I think that's a really powerful motivator for me, to realize that there's always a choice. And if I choose to do it or not, it's up to me. So that's one thing on the individual level. I think on the other level, it's just that awareness that as a leader, I mean, maybe your greatest responsibility is to tap into the motivation of the people that you're leading. And that's a really big challenge. I think it's really rewarding and interesting, but it's, there's always a lot of stuff that you can do, but it takes an effort. It really takes an effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how to do it, I mean, that's a whole nother few hours of stuff we could talk about.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of, as I said, levers and incentives and different things. I think just going back to the where we started the conversation, I think if you're finding yourself having trouble getting motivated, using things like what BJ Fogg talks about, finding triggers, different signals, different circumstances in your day that can trigger behavior. I think recognizing when to make the commitment, make it at a time when you're in the right frame of mind, and then don't try and renegotiate later when it comes time to doing it. So getting in the habit. And then, most behaviors, it's about developing good habits. So on a personal level, I think that's really important. I think in terms of another really important thing we talked about today was just being clear on what your motivation is, being clear on what's driving you. What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to get to? We talked about the clarity of goals. And then recognizing when fear is motivating you. I think that's such a huge piece, whether that's what's driving you or what's standing in your way. So, and then remembering that in life, whether it's in work or wherever, that the three pillars of motivation outside of the financial stuff, autonomy, mastery, purpose, try and check those boxes as much as you can, and then getting into a flow state. If you never read the book Flow, by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, you'll never recognize the spelling. I've practiced saying his name. That
you're really good at that pronunciation.
Talk about him a lot. I think those are the really key pieces I'd like people to take away. And so I'm going away from this very motivated on my this morning. So
me too.
Great. Look, Toby, it's been great as always. Thank you. And it's great to have you back and to have another chat together. And so I hope that's been helpful for everyone listening. I think we're going to wrap it up there. And for anybody who is watching us on YouTube, please subscribe, give us a like. Our motivation, our purpose is really to share the message with as many people and create more positive individuals, more healthy organizations, and better leaders. So it's really about sharing that message. And if you want to get in touch with one of us, you can reach Toby through his LinkedIn site, Tobias Dempker. And for me, on my website, peterteuscher.com. We'd really love to get your feedback. If you have any questions or comments, if there's a topic you want us to cover, we definitely will. So with that, Toby, have a great day.
You too.
And for everyone listening, thanks for joining us, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye.